Good morning, everybody. It is a very, very cold day in Nashville. It's January the 14th. Welcome back. I think we have a lot of people signed up today, so this should be fun. We have a new guest, a new arrival to Nashville, Daniel Singh, who has taken over as the executive director of the Metro Arts Commission. Daniel, welcome to the show and welcome to Nashville. How you doing?
Thank you, Vice Mayor. I'm really glad to be here. I'm glad to be in Nashville. A lot of exciting and wonderful things happening here.
Well, did you bring the cold weather? Is this your fault?
well, this is actually, we wouldn't consider this cold in the Northeast. So I feel like we have a lucky and warm winter. So I'm glad I have a warm winter.
Thanks for rubbing it in as we're freezing and you're going like, oh, it's summer. And before we get into all the interesting things that you're bringing to the Metro Arts Commission, I usually start while we're letting people in. I usually ask a very irrelevant question. Usually it's about something that's hanging behind the person's head, but there is nothing back there.
I know. We just have a whiteboard here. I'm still getting settled in, and hopefully we'll have more paintings all around me, but I can talk about what I would have had in the back if I had more time.
Well, I will say you're in charge of the Arts Commission. Is there anything, is that the thing behind your head, is that art? Or is it just
absolutely right? It's an open canvas. We can all create something magical together. And I just want to clarify, I'm in charge of the agency. We have the Mattia Powell, the chair, is in charge of the commission, so I'm in charge of the agency. Yes.
Okay, let me ask you one other irrelevant question, sure. And I want you to explain this. I want you to be very careful how you explain this. So, I am, I do appreciate art, and I do go to museums, and I do go to art museums, and I also, go to music events and things like that, and theater. But I remember going to the Museum of Modern Art in New York, and there was a white canvas that had a red dot on it. And I was like, wait a minute, I could do that. So explain to me how that can hang in the Museum of Modern Art.
Well, I'm not a curator, but with that caveat, I think, art is all about having people to reflect and ask questions like the one you're asking, like, why did that make it into the gallery? And what is before that painting? What is after that? And what is the context? And I think that's what's really intriguing about art for me, is that it's all about asking questions, not about answers. And each one of us can come up with answers that make sense to us or the situation, and or how we perceive what the artist did before and after, and how that white canvas with a red dot fits into all of that. So I think that's what's exciting about art for me, is that it lets you find your way into it.
Right. So this afternoon, I'm going to get a white canvas and put a red dot on it. And then I'm going to give it to you, and we'll see if you hang it someplace.
I will, yes. And then you can sign it so that when you're...
Well, okay. So welcome, everybody. Welcome back. This is our first program of the new year. We started these right around the beginning of the pandemic, and we've just continued on, and people watch. And they can either watch live or they can watch, we post them. They've been showing up on NECAT. It's kind of a good way, Daniel, to kind of learn about the city. And what we've tried to do is, these are not, we don't try to create chaos or conflict on these shows. It's more of kind of an educational opportunity to kind of talk about the various things around the city, and then people can watch, and then they can ask questions. So we're really glad you're here. And the reason I explain that to everybody is that Daniel is new to Nashville. And let me see, we have a couple of people here today on the call. I think Councilmember Berkeley Allen is on. I'm checking to see if anybody else has popped on. We will update that list as we move on. I know that Mattia Powell, who's the chairman of the Metro Arts Commission, is also on. So Daniel, tell me this. Tell everybody about yourself. Where did you grow up? how did you get involved in arts, and how did you get to Nashville?
Sure. So I grew up in India and spent my first 17 years there, finished high school, and my parents moved to the US so I could do college here. And I was a computer science major. I was a geeky nerd, as nerdy as you can be in a country of nerds, is what my friends would call me. And so I was very busy doing my computer science work, and that's when I had to take a physical education requirement. I took a dance class, and it kind of changed my life. And I switched trajectories from computer science to dance, and went on to be in the arts the rest of my life. But you can imagine the conversation I had to have with my immigrant parents who uprooted themselves and moved across the world to a new country so I could go to college, and saying, I'm going to give up computer science and do dance instead. So that was an interesting moment. The other part also was that I grew up in Madras, or Chennai, India. It's the center of the cultural scene in the south of India. And there's what would be the equivalent of Juilliard. There's a school called Kalakshetra. And even though all of those things were in my backyard, I didn't have access to them. And I never got a chance to see the arts in India. It was ironic that I started learning Indian dance when I came to the US. And so there were all of those kind of lucky accidents that brought me to where I am. So once I finished my degree in dance, I went out and felt like I wanted to do my own thing, because I was still interested in preserving some of my Indian heritage, and also interested in exploring the modern dance world. And no one was working in kind of this hybrid mode at that time. So I created my own dance company, and in DC, I ran it for several years. And then I felt like I needed to go back and get some management experience. I did an MBA degree, and then have been working in various arts administrative roles in government or nonprofits for the last 5 to 6 years. This opportunity opened up in Nashville, and it's known as the Music City, the Athens of the South, and the public arts here is renowned throughout the country. You're always hearing about this or that public art project, and I wanted to just take this opportunity to kind of learn a different part of the country and be here and get to know the rich art scene here and see if I can be of service. That's how I ended up in Nashville.
That's how you got here. All right. So you talked about Nashville, that people do talk about
Yes.
public arts in different places. What do they say? I mean, so, we live it, we drive around, we see the Musica statue and the sticks and other things. And then we see different places where there's public art. When people talk about Nashville and their public arts, what do they say?
People often talk about whether you should do one big thing or you should have a lot of small things that kind of enriches the whole city or county. And I think Nashville's often talked about, both for the music and for the public art, as something that's woven into the fabric of the county/city. It's not just one big thing, right? Like we have so many great public artworks. Right now, we have 178 artworks in our collection in public arts. Similarly, we have so many beautiful music venues and bands and places to go see it. And I think it transforms the whole nature of the city and community. And that's what they use Nashville as an example for, or at least that's what I've heard, rather than having one place to go to, like the Museum of Modern Art or something major. Everywhere in the city, there's this culture permeating through it. And I think that's also what was exciting for me to come to Nashville.
Okay, so for those people who are watching who don't fully understand Metro Arts, as you come into this position as the new executive director, what is the purpose of the Metropolitan Arts Commission, Metro Nashville Arts Commission? What is their overall role and responsibility?
I mean, our role is to really create a vibrant culture through the arts. And we also are really committed to equity driving the arts, or arts driving the equity portion of it. So it's really about the vibrancy of the community and making sure everyone has access to arts and is able to thrive in the arts and is able to be whoever they want to be in the arts. And we want to support all of those things. And really at the intersection of all of those values is where Metro Arts wants to be of service. We provide grants and programming, and we hope that really we can be of service to everyone in Metro Nashville, and that's our goal.
Okay, but and how expansive is it? Nashville obviously has all kinds of different opportunities. I mean, we've been known as Music City USA. That's an art. We have artwork. We have the Frist and other museums. The Fisk has a wonderful gallery. There's all kinds of opportunities. The Children's Theater. What is again? And you haven't been here that long, but I mean, in terms of trying to understand all this and trying to make it available to all Nashvillians, how does that work? How do you bring in all those different entities and kind of make sure that we're funding and providing assistance to all those different types of entities?
Yeah, so I use this visual. I feel like there's a kaleidoscope of colorful gears in Nashville, of energy, of artistic, creative energy that's all around Nashville, spinning and creating wonderful tornadoes or whirlpools, or whatever you want to call them. And they're doing so much great work. And what I would love to do is find a way to kind of bring them together so the gears mesh a little bit and talk to each other and can kind of exponentially grow the energy. And I think that's the part we want to like think through in the next few years. We're about to launch a strategic planning portion of our work in this spring, actually, April of 2023. And that's a question we want to look at, is how do we connect people to resources to people? How do we look at what we need 10 years from now, 20 years from now, as a master plan, as a city's population might hit a certain mark? What are the elements that make a city successful, and how do you make all of these pieces come together intentionally and not just wait for it to happen? So we're looking at it in a kind of a holistic long-term planning approach as part of the cultural planning and strategic planning. In the short term, I think we have to be facilitators and be available for the community to come to us with their needs. And then we have to turn around and see how we can find the resources for it or advocate for resources for it, whether it's through the council or the mayor's office, and make sure we start working on building those connections and networks for the artists and arts organizations in our community.
Okay. And I'm looking at some of the questions that came in, and I'll go through some of them. But this may, and I feel sometimes when I'm looking at it, I'm going like, how can I can't answer that question. He hasn't been here that long. But I'll try to preface it with some basic information so you'll kind of know why I'm asking you this. All right, so obviously Nashville is a booming city. It is growing very, very quickly. And one of the things that you're kind of walking into is this old Nashville versus new Nashville. Nashville used to be a kind of a quiet downtown. People left downtown and they went home. And so you had lots of little parts of Nashville that grew to become a big city. Now, all of a sudden, everything is vibrant. We're building everywhere. And a lot of, particularly if you drive down Broadway, there's buildings everywhere. So people would go, I think the question is, how do you safeguard the older part of Nashville, some of the stuff that's been here before, that is a part of kind of the art community? And again, it's kind of an unfair question, but how do you bring a new perspective? What are you looking for as you're starting to study this to try to figure out, how do I make sure that I don't, as we're growing, we don't lose sight of the older parts of what made the city good?
Absolutely. And I think, as people, whether you're doing planning work or when people are looking to move to a city, arts and culture is something they're often really curious about. Like, what do they do when they're not working, right? Like, work is only from 9 to 5, that's 40 hours a week. Rest of the hours in the evenings and weekends, they're looking for arts and culture to go to. And people want the local flavor of a place. And I think that's what's unique about Nashville, is that you do have so many arts venues all around Nashville, and figuring out how do we keep them thriving and moving forward is going to be crucial for us to keep the newcomers here, because otherwise, especially now with everyone being able to work remotely, why else would they want to move to Nashville? Like, it's not just, so they could work anywhere remotely if they wanted to. So really paying attention to those cultural treasures, the ones who are part of the old Nashville, and finding ways to amplify their voices and give them the support they need to stay here and not get gentrified out of Nashville is really important for us. And not just from one agency, right? Not just from Metro Arts, like planning needs to be thinking about this. And we have to be thinking about it holistically as the whole ecosystem changes and address this and make sure that there are opportunities for live work spaces so that artists are not priced out of places they were in the past able to live and work in. And if that means changing zoning requirements, what does that look like? And some of this is out of my expertise, and I don't know all of those nuances, but we have to be having those difficult conversations to figure out how do you preserve the treasures we have in Nashville while we bring in the new artists here. And just as one small example I can give you is we're doing an NFT workshop. It's working in the digital space for artists. And we're trying to be intentional about bringing in older artists to this workshop and pairing them with younger artists, because I think both have something to offer to each other. Maybe the younger artists can teach the technological part to the older artists, but the older artist went through an apprenticeship program and knows the networks in the city and knows how to connect them to the other person, so they can both teach each other. And so that's just one example, but we want to be really intentional about creating those opportunities for the older artists or arts organizations to stay relevant and thriving. And then we're also aligning that right up with our Thrive grant processes, so that when the grant application opens, our hope is that there is an 80-year-old artist who lives in North Nashville who might pair up with a 20-year-old spoken word artist, and they come up and put an application and ask for funding to create a new project together. So they're working intergenerationally, inter-genre, and then we are able to fund them and keep all aspects, the old and the new, thriving and moving forward.
Okay. Again, there are so many opportunities here in Nashville, but Councilmember Allen had asked a question about independent music venues, because we're scared we're going to lose those. And how do you, from the Arts Commission standpoint, how do you try to figure out a way to preserve that? We don't want to lose what made this city great.
Yes.
And we've got new things that are making it even greater. But we don't want to lose. I think people don't want to lose what they remember that kind of made the city what it was.
Yeah, I would love to.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would love to explore the concept of arts districts and look at how we can bring in music venues, government, for-profit, non-profit, schools, community centers, working together collectively in those arts districts, because a lot of the needs are not something that one agency or one source of funding can solve. It's a multi-layered, intersectional need that's happening, and it's changing. And so I think figuring out what are our anchors, asking that question as part of the community. Let the community decide, what do we value? What do we want to preserve? And I'm sure the arts venues and music venues will be on the top of that list. And then once we identify that list, how can we work together across sectors and consider arts districts and have incentives to support them across government, nonprofit, for-profit sources, and in a thoughtful long-term planning approach, and not just feel like, well, they need to close the budget this year or next year. And so one of the questions that had come in, I remember saying that, would you support a film tax? And I'm like, we have to ask the larger question, what is the best way to find sustainable funding for music and entertainment or film or arts? And for me, I as much as I want a dedicated source of funding, I'd rather have a dedicated portfolio of funding, because we saw what happened to tourism and arts that depended on hotel taxes or travel taxes during the pandemic. They lost their budget, right? So what is the lesson we learned from that? And rather than just having one dedicated source of funding for whether it's for film or music or arts, I would love for your office and the mayor's office, the council members, to think about what is the portfolio of funding sources we can give them, so that if gasoline taxes or hotel taxes or film taxes are bad this year, they don't go bankrupt. So that's really the longer term approach we should be thinking about, especially now that we've been through a pandemic and there's potentially a recession looming, and who knows what's coming around the corner. And so really thinking about it in a holistic, longer term approach is how I think we should go about meeting all of the needs that are coming at us.
Okay. So let me switch for a minute and ask, kind of, well, we'll get into some philosophy in just a minute, but how do you, what's your take on trying to get young people engaged in the arts? And and I guess there was a question about it, theater camps for underprivileged youth, transcending barriers, things like that, art opportunities in our community. So we have opportunities, we have certain opportunities for young people to get involved. But how do you expand those opportunities so that you reach out to, you were talking about growing up in India, but you didn't have a chance to, see or go participate in things that were pretty close to you.
Yeah.
How do we increase our outreach so that more young people have access to the arts and understand them maybe better?
Yeah. So I think the arts are kind of a cultural currency, if you will, kind of like a language. And the earlier you engage in them, it changes the wiring of your brain, right? Like, picture this, like there are artists who walk into a room, they don't know who the director is, they don't know who the composer is, they don't know who the choreographer is, they don't know what the script is or what part they're going to get. The audition, they figure out which is going to work, and they don't know. So they work towards an unscripted problem in a unique way. They find the creativity, they use each other's energy, they create something on the fly. And I think as the world is facing all of these unknown challenges, whether it's another pandemic or whether the environmental crisis or lack of resources, global warming, any of those things are not going to be solved by one person or one approach. And I think that's where the arts are really vital to the future of our country, of Nashville, is to figure out how we can get that way of approaching problems with an open mind, not knowing what the solution is, not knowing who your co-artists are going to be, not knowing what the script is, and really working from a blank canvas and building our vision forward. And that's what good education does, right? It's not teaching someone how to, it's teaching someone how to learn, not what to learn. You want to give them tools so that if they spent the first 20 years learning computer science, they can still switch and go over to dance. And what my dance teachers did for me was, when I came into dance, rather than talking just about theme and variation, they talked about, in calculus, you have an equation and then you substitute the variable and then you get a solution. If you substitute a different number for that variable, you get a different solution. That's what theme and variation is. So they showed me that these are not separate parts of the world, that they showed me that what's happening in science or calculus or physics is happening in the arts world. And I think that's what's really crucial, is that we not think of the arts as something that's a luxury, but that's something that connects everything. It's related to science, it's related to math, it's related to well-being. But the one thing that's really unique about the arts is that it also lets people be emotional. There's no place for a student to be emotional, right? Everything, a kid comes into the classroom and you're told to behave, sit in your seat, do what you're told. And then you come into the world, the problems are not that easy, right? Like no one's like giving you a very concrete problem while you're sitting at your desk at this time. You get emails all hours of the day. You don't know who is going to ask you for the next thing. And so I feel like that's where the arts are really unique and give the opportunity for students at any age to learn that you have to learn to improvise, to make up things, and know that the framework you have will give you the right answer in the long run. And I think some of the concrete things with education, I would say, is that, when I was talking to Alan at the Symphony, he said the largest indicator for them if someone is going to be a subscriber is if they've been exposed to music in the elementary school years for a continued time, not just a one-off in and out outreach program, but the outreach program is actually sustained over a semester. Maybe it starts off with just a petting zoo, but then follow it up with some lesson plans that support the teacher, and then connecting music with math and physics, so that they see that this is not just a one-off, and building that long-term experience for them. And that's what's going to lay the foundation 30 years later for them to become subscribers to the Symphony. So really, we have to be thinking about the whole ecosystem of the arts and thinking about how education is not just getting the subscribers to the Symphony, but then who these musicians might end up being, physicists or space engineers, or all of those programs, and getting them the right tools to get ready for that. And I think that is the question on hand. It's a larger question than we can handle or solve today, but I think that's the approach I would take, is to really make sure outreach is not just about getting them to explore music or dance or theater, but outreach is really a pathway to connect what they're interested in, whether it's physics or math or English, and giving them the tools to use what they're interested in, using the arts as a gateway, and then outreach really showing them all the potential roles they can play, whether it's a subscriber or an artist themselves or a patron, or they themselves become a board member. All of those opportunities are there for them. So that's a really like a multi-layered approach to outreach is really, I think, the answer to the solution.
So is there, and because I don't know, is there research out there that says how early you should try to get kids involved in the arts? And then there's a follow-up question, which would be, I know you haven't been here that long. Have you had the chance to talk to the administration over at the Metro Nashville Public Schools to at least get to know them and see how we can start engaging more?
Yeah, so the earlier the better, because often, students learn multiple ways, visually, orally, through sense and touch. And so the earlier students engage in the arts, the better their development is, overall development, and then in general as well. And I have been in touch with the schools. Jeff and I have been talking. We haven't met in person yet, but we really want to be a partner and figure out how to make this work for them, for the school system, because I really think that's where it starts. If you can get the K through 5 years to be rich and nurturing for schools, then this is where we can see the next generation of artists or problem solvers of the unscripted problems we face. So we hope to figure out ways we can do that. One of the ideas we're toying with is, could we get resident artists, local Nashville artists, to be resident artists at, say, 3 to 4 schools a year, and we give them a stipend, an artist stipend, to be that resident artist. And so that there's a continuity there. They're working with teachers to develop lesson plans, and the students know that this artist lives in their community, that they can actually make a living being an artist, and it's not just something you do after school or in the weekends. And so thinking through some of those options, and very excited about the possibilities. And again, this is where our culture planning, artistic, strategic planning work forward will help us figure out what's the right need. And we want to engage the community in asking them, what do you need? What makes sense for your family, for your children? And ask the teachers the same question: what is most useful for you? And find a way to build that framework out as we go forward in partnership with the schools, because they've been doing this for many years already, and hopefully we can learn from them and build on that as well.
Okay. So there's some good questions coming in. Beth English is sending in some good questions, but I'm going to ask something first, and then I'm going to go back.
Sure.
To what she's sort of referencing. So we talked about kids or young people, adults who, like you said, I mean, we're all the product of our environment, and some of us were exposed to the arts when we were younger, some were not. Mm-hmm. How do you get adults who really never really thought much about or weren't exposed to the arts to understand that there are things that you understand what it is to come see and be a part of something that maybe they're not used to or comfortable with?
So I think, I would use jobs, which is on everyone's mind, as a way to get maybe people to convince them. So many jobs now are asking questions around emotional intelligence, right?
Somebody said, I'm just saying.
Well, yes, that would be an easy way. It's the social lubricant of our times. But in a more genuine way, I would say, like, people are asking interviews, tell us an example about how you use emotional intelligence to solve a complicated problem. And I think that's where the arts can say, here's a way you can start working across whatever barriers there are, whether it's cultural, generational, language barriers, and find a way to kind of close those gaps using the arts, right? That's the kind of fun part of the arts. Is it's creative, it's challenging, and every job that I've had in the past 10 years has been nothing like the job description that was given to me, right? Like, I had to improvise, make up things. And So I think that's what I would focus on, is to tell people that this is a learning opportunity, and learning doesn't stop when you're an adult, right? Like the moment you stop learning is when you stop growing. So use this as a learning opportunity, as a professional development opportunity, and find ways to take what you learn in whatever artistic performance or gallery you come to. And I can guarantee you that it will go back and enrich you in your professional life and your family life. And so that part of the responsibility lies with the curators, with the programmers, to think about ways of how we can break down those barriers, and how do we make it accessible for people, regardless of whether they've had past experience in the arts or not. And having a pre-performance discussion maybe, or a gallery talk that lets someone who's never seen postmodern art understand what postmodernism was trying to do, what was the conversation around postmodernism at the time, what was happening politically, socially, and why postmodernism emerged as a statement. So giving context for the art is important as well. And I think that's why we value our dramaturgs and curators and programmers to help us give that context, to bring in people who've never been there. But if all else fails, yes, alcohol is the answer to most of our questions.
So there's all kinds of really good things coming in. And Beth just said she's used arts as a leadership development tool. So that's where I was headed with all this. Sometimes I don't know really where I'm headed, but we live in a very divided world. It's very diverse, but very divided. How did, and we've tried different things to bring people together. Do you see arts as a tool that can actually help, cross those barriers and bring about the ability for people to actually talk now?
Yeah, absolutely. I think arts are crucial to that. During the pandemic, people were trying to find a way to connect with each other. And a lot of the things that people would never have tried online before the pandemic, they were willing to try, right? So we saw choirs forming online, and online plays, online visual art. We saw online poetry, all of these and people were not asking, what is your background? Are you on this side of the spectrum or that side? So they just came together because there was a human need to connect. And I think that's universal, right? And then that's where the arts are like the glue of the society. It holds us together. And there's a need for connection, and arts is a perfect way to connect. And if we're coming there about building community, yes, you should be able to sit and talk with across the table with anyone. And you might not agree with everything they say, and you might go back to thinking the same way as you were before you had the conversation. But I think what arts does is it gives you the moment to pause and assume that there's going to be a new way for us to engage, and gives us a bridge. Maybe you don't have the language, but if you play an improv game that gives you a series of questions to interact with the person you're going to sit with, then that will be the way you find a way to bridge with that person. There's also interesting things that are happening intentionally to work across people, to build people across the divide. So there's a virtual exhibit, I forget the name of it, I will look this up and send it to you. But there's a virtual exhibit in which you go into a program, it's a virtual reality program, and you're given characters A and B, and for the first 30 minutes, you get to interact with characters A and B. End of the 30 minutes, you get the choice of picking character A or B to continue another segment. And so then you pick, okay, I'm gonna go with B. Then you get B and C for the second half and say, pick B and C. Who do you want to have? And then you chat for 30 minutes, and then you do this for a few hours, and then you've gone through maybe A through whatever, P. And then maybe you pick B as a consistent partner all the way through. Or maybe you were all over the place and picking different people. What the virtual reality program does at the end is it takes every person you said no to at every interaction, creates a composite of all of those no characters, and presents them back as the last character for you to spend an hour with. So this is the power of art, right? Like an artist said, how do I work across divides? And let them be comfortable for the first 2 hours, 3 hours, let them work with the person they want. And they were saying no to these character traits or political beliefs or religious beliefs, whatever. At the end, I'm going to give you this virtual person for you to talk with. And the goal is not to just stay in the virtual space, but to take what you learned in that virtual reality experience that an artist developed and go back in the community and be able to engage across those differences and divides in practical ways. And I think that's really the power of arts, is to work across those divides and learn the tools.
I was sitting here listening, and there's I'm also watching the chat boxes, which is really interesting. A lot of stuff going on. There is, I was just thinking, the Turk, which is an advocacy group dealing with immigrants in Nashville, sponsored as one of their fundraisers a bus tour, and it started growing bigger and bigger. And you'd buy a ticket, and you would go to restaurants that you would probably never ever walk into.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And they would have it all set up, and you would taste food that, again, culturally different. And again, in places that you go like, I wouldn't go there unless you really were from the area. And so what they started exposing different people to were different restaurants, different places, and it started going back. There are certain types of arts that some people think I would never, I would never go and go watch a dance concert.
Mm-hmm.
Personally, I would. I'm not a big opera fan,
mm-hmm.
but I also don't understand opera.
Mm-hmm.
And so, are there? It sounds like there's just so many opportunities. And I would also say that this can't be something for just people who have lots of money. This has to be for all kinds of, a diverse
Mm-hmm.
background. For people who said, I would never go to an opera, but maybe if there was a class that I could take that wasn't very expensive or was free, and it taught me about opera, and I'm sure there probably are things like that, maybe I'd go. And it sounds like there are things like that. But part of, I think, your responsibility, without telling you what you have to do, is you're head of Metro Arts. Your job is to let people know what's going on out there, and make sure that people participate. And since you've been here, have you seen other ways to kind of reach out to the Nashville and the greater Davidson County community to let people know what's going on in the arts world?
So I think, I'm going to walk into a risky area here. This is all, I haven't experienced this, but I've heard about it. There are a lot of speakeasy events that happen in Nashville that I haven't been able to get invited to yet. Young artists, or maybe older artists, who come in for a week, get a permit at a warehouse, start setting up Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, do shows Friday and Saturday, and then they clean up and are gone by Sunday, right? And I'm like, how do I get an invite to this? There's no website, there's no social media presence, and but it's thriving, and they're doing well enough that they don't even come to us for funding, right? And so I want to get plugged into that. So if any of you know where these are happening, please invite me. I'd love to come and experience one of those events. But I think that's the question, is right, like figuring out how do we get the word out? And we've relied so far on traditional print journalism or print media, and now people are moving and using different ways to get their information, and we should move with the times. And we're looking at potentially standing up an arts journalism program to do precisely that. How do we get the word out? How do we do previews and features of these rich, talented artists in Nashville whose stories are not getting told out there? And then, because we're hearing that in our grant reports, right? Like we say, we ask for reports and say, what are your numbers? And they say, 200 people came. What was your capacity? And they were like, 8, we could have supported 800. And then, but there was not enough publicity. And so the assumption always has been that, what used to be in the print paper, if we just put it online, that'll be enough. But now we have things online and no one's finding it. There's so much out there to find. And so it's not not an easy answer. I don't want the listeners to feel like I'm dodging the questions, but I think it's a composite answer we have to think through. People are getting the information in a lot of different places, and algorithms are changing constantly in the places. But I would love to engage with the social media influencers. There are social media influencers on TikTok and Instagram who have over 300,000 followers in Nashville. And how do we get them to say, here are the top 10 things to see this weekend or this Friday or whatever, or here's where I'm going to be hanging out. And so really figuring out where people are going to get their information and then building our pipelines to them. And I think that's where we can be a source of support. The other thing also is that, this kind of goes back to our funding and our own internal capacities. We've been stood up as a funding agency. We give out grants, but the need in the community is much larger than just funding, right? They need these wraparound services. They want to get previews in press. They want journalism support. They want communication support. They want board and staff development. They want artist development support. And there's a gap here, and there's no arts service agency that does some of that work. ABC is doing Arts and Business Council is doing amazing work to fill some of those gaps, but there are still gaps left out there. So we have to, as we approach this cultural planning, we have to really think about what does the community need, and not just read the numbers on the quantitative reports we're getting back, but look at the stories, the gaps in the numbers. If only 200 people out of the 800 came, how do we figure out next year to make sure they get at least 600 or 800 people, right? So how do we get that going? To make all of that happen, I'm going to be coming back to your office, to the mayor's office, to the council, and asking for more money. And I hope everyone here will also advocate for that, because really often the three levers we have is time, money, or excellence. You compromise on time, you're going to have to put a lot of money to get the excellence. If you compromise on money, it's going to take a long time to get the excellence. If you don't have time or money, then you're going to compromise on excellence. So this is kind of what we're going to have to all work together and figure out as we go forward.
So we have never had this much chat in the chat box ever, and it's hard to keep up with this stuff.
Maybe I have to come back then, Jim.
Well, we need to make sure that there's all kinds of things. Oh, even more stuff coming in. They want you back. All right, let me. When you were talking about making sure that people understood what was going on. Have you ever been to the Spoleto Festival?
I have not. No, I have not.
Okay. Yeah. Well, so we were in Charleston, and we just happened to be there for part of it. But I think I was looking. I was trying to find what events were going on during the Spoleto Festival, and my wife wanted to go to a craft fair. And so while she was walking around the craft fair, I think I was looking for a restroom in the church right behind me. Well, it happened to be, they happened to be having an event that night at the church. And it was an old traditional music from the Low Country in South Carolina. And so I was like, where do I get tickets? And somebody said, well, I have some extra tickets. I was like, I don't even know where to find them. So we got some extra tickets and we went there. And for the next hour and a half, it was just a tremendous music event. That was just great. But we just kind of floundered into it. Mm-hmm. And then I was trying to figure out it's going back to, how do you find these things?
Yeah.
How do you make it easy to find these things? And then I think part of this conversation that was going on with the chat box was we certainly have all kinds of music events. We used to have other types of music events where, now I can't even remember what they were called, but we would close downtown and there would be stages in different places and people could go and watch different concerts.
Yeah.
How do you do that? Maybe and that's art, I get that, but I'm talking about art shows, theater, music, everything that people can go to and see some amazing things that are going on. And have you ever witnessed anything quite like that in other places where you may have been?
I've been part of fringe festivals that try to do something similar. My kind of I love the energy of fringe. It lets anyone be an artist, and you get a set amount of time to come in, create new work, or bring in existing work. So that's something I really like. The struggle I have with fringe festivals is that the artists are almost always bled dry, and they're paying out of their credit cards. I had to max out my credit cards to get my dance company into a fringe festival, and so that's the only thing that I struggle with. Is like, how do we make it financially feasible for the artists, right? So I don't want it to be a burden for them. I want it to be something that's a source of revenue. I would love to like think about, can we launch a Biennale festival or Triennale festival in Nashville, where, like you said, Frist is working with North Nashville, or the local artists in North Nashville are going to be the ones featured at TPAC. So how do we look forward and start creating a structure and a rhythm to make that happen? Because everyone is interested in doing this collaborative works, but finding the time while you're paying your bills, making sure the roof is fixed, and making sure that this weekend's artist is picked up at the airport, and then the exhibit curation is happening as it's supposed to, is really hard. So I wonder if there's an external structure, like a festival once every 2 or 3 years, where we get to get an artist and work across the community in a thoughtful way would be wonderful. The example that also really stands recently to me is like, how do we bring in someone like Lizzo to Nashville, right? Like, the Library of Congress used her to play one of their crystal flutes. Website crashed from the number of visitors. And who would think of Library of Congress as the place to hang out, enough that the website crashed, right? And that's the kind of marketing strategy we need to be thinking about. If Butch is bringing some great artists into the stadium, how do we piggyback on that? Maybe have them do some school visits, connect to the local artists. Can local artists be opening for these artists in the stadium? Really thoughtful, big time integrated approaches. All of those is going to take a lot of time to coordinate and make sure that artist is, because the schedules for the stadium, I'm sure, are booking 3 to 5 years out. They're bringing major internationally acclaimed artists. And so how do we know that the local artist has the resources to build for those 3 to 5 years if they are going to be the opening act? Figuring out all of those things is going to take time and money. And we have to commit to arts as a valuable part of our community. And everyone has to work on this. This is not something just the Metro Arts can do. This is going to be tourism, planning, everyone, education, all working together. And I think that's the path I would take, and that's what makes me excited, and also makes me committed to stay in Nashville, because none of these solutions is something I can just fix the next year and move on. It's something that I'm committed to staying and bringing about.
Well, I think, and I like the idea of when you mentioned what the Library of Congress. We've often wondered at the Metro Council. It's like and particularly on public hearing nights, when you've got a major public hearing thing going on, or it's a budget public hearing, putting artwork out in the hallway, because people are standing out there anyway.
Yes.
Waiting. So
yes.
Why not put art out there? We started the practice just recently of letting young kids bang the gavel to start the meeting. Mm-hmm. Kind of fun. They get to see what's going on, and I think that's a good thing. But I've also wondered why we don't have more music performances at the council.
I would love to. Yeah, I would. If you give us 5 minutes, we can find you amazing artists for every council meeting. And that's something we've actually started at the commission meeting. When I started in last summer, every meeting we bring in 1 or 2 local artists that we've funded to come and either talk about what they are doing with the funding, or just present a song or a dance. And then from there, just head over to the meeting. So the commissioners get to understand that these tedious budget discussions or policy changes, what does it do? What is the impact of all of that? And that's been a huge success, both for the artists, because they get to sit for the next 2 hours and see what the commissioners are debating and trying to think about the infrastructure and the support systems and the professional development. It's not just about giving them the X amount of dollars, but how do we create the whole infrastructure? So the artists see that. And then the commissioners see what impact our work is doing, because it can get caught up in bureaucracy, and bureaucracy is, as we all know, is tedious at its best. But I would love, if you give me 5 minutes at each council meeting, I will find you the best artists here to bring to each event. You won't have to worry about a thing. We'll take care of the sound system or whatever we need to do. And I would love to come and feature the artists at every council meeting. And outside the hallway, I would love it to be a part of the council meeting, not just when people are waiting, but as part of the official council meeting.
Well, I think what you're looking for is, and there is art. I think when David Briley was mayor, all of a sudden art started showing up in the courthouse, and I noticed it and I started looking at it. You've got, what you're looking for is, I mean, some of our council meetings, there's very few people there, so you don't want to waste the opportunity. But there are times, particularly around the budget, where there are lots of people, and you could expose people to a lot of different things that are going on, which I think is really good. We had, I think I may have told you this, a friend and I had come up with the idea years ago, when long before Nashville exploded with all this stuff, of having a weekend where, particularly with music, it was tied to one performer, and everybody played that performance. So if it was Elvis Presley, if it was Frank Sinatra, if it was somebody else, I mean, so everybody during that weekend played, and you knew exactly where you could go. So even the Fifth Jubilee Singers were hooked in, as well as the Bluebird Cafe, as well as Station Inn, all those places. And obviously some of these places are starting to disappear now. And we don't want that to happen. We want to hold on to what makes Nashville so interesting. So there's so many different opportunities, but the one I can offer up is working with you on the council. So we ought to talk about that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let me change. We don't have too much time left. I want to talk about funding. Okay. Where are we? How do we compare to other cities in terms of what we do in terms of funding for the arts? And what do you want to see? If you're obviously, you've got council members that will listen to this, and we'd love for you to come to a council meeting as soon as you can. You may not want to stay for the whole thing, but we could certainly have you come early and you could meet some of the council.
Yeah.
What are you looking at in terms of funding and what your needs are?
Yeah, so absolutely, I would love to come to a council meeting and present officially, or just be around to answer any questions. But I think, I thought through, in the time that I've been here, it's, again, it's just a snapshot. I haven't been here long, only about 5 months now, going on 6. But I think some of the ideas I've had is that we need to really focus on arts districts and figure out how we can create this public-private, for-profit and nonprofit partnerships model, so that we can save the venues, we can bring new programs in, we can connect it to real estate developers and say, we'll give you a higher density, but then you have to build studio spaces out for artists and live workspaces for artists. So how do we work at problems that are multi-layered in a multi-layered approach? And so arts district is something I would really be interested in doing. I really think we also need to be standing up some capacity building programs for organizations that are thriving and doing well, or starting out in the first stage of their life cycle, because the artists who are doing these underground arts events almost went out of business during the pandemic because their model didn't work, right? So how do we make sure we support them in moments like that? So building capacity in arts organizations, giving them the money, giving them the professional expertise, whether they need around fundraising, marketing, board development. And again, ABC is doing a lot of this work, so we don't want to step on each other's toes or duplicate work. So figuring out what that rhythm is between all the various agencies would be really important for me. And the other piece I would really want to build out is the artist residencies. I mentioned this earlier in schools. How do we find local artists in Nashville and say, hey, you're going to be an artist in residence at these 2 elementary schools and these 2 mid schools for the next year. Your job is to make sure every student in the school is coming out thrilled at the prospect of arts in the school. And how do we connect that artist in a thoughtful way with the teachers and build out lesson plans for physics and rhetoric and mathematics and I said physics already. All of those ways, so that it's not just seen as something that's after school or in the theater program, but connecting the arts into their whole education experience. So that's something I'd want to get funding for. And I want to also get funding for individual artists. That's one of the gaps we have, is that we fund projects and we fund operating grants, and we don't really fund individual artists. And as we know, artists don't just come up with a project the first time. They probably have a trial and error phase when they have to throw away a lot of things and be risky, right? At the heart of it, cities that are thriving are the cities that let artists be risky and take risks. And that's something we value. There's no return if you don't take risks, right? And so we know that from the financial side. Why don't we let artists do that? And so thinking about all of those pieces, I would say I would love if the council and the mayor give us about another $10 to $12 million. And I can show you how this would flow through every part of the council district, and it's not going to get tied into just one neighborhood or one program. You know, the capacity building program would be built out across all council districts. The arts districts would be built out across all geographic areas, or maybe even thought about how do we bridge council districts that weren't working together in the past. So that's kind of the number I would love to see, you know, between $10 to $12 million to help us do everything that there's just in the past 5 months people have asked me for. We haven't even done the strategic planning for the master plan, and we might have to come back with more money for that. But to really say that this is a value we bring to the community, because, you know, the health agency, taking a page from them, they have this one pager about health and all policies, because they've found out through their research that what you get from your doctor and the medications is only 20% of your healthcare. The remaining 80% is, do you have access to a grocery store? How long do you have to drive to school or to your work? And if that is making you less likely to go to a gym, do you have access to a gym nearby? Do you have access to cultural activities? Do you have access to parks and libraries and community centers near you? They're finding out that that is what's going to contribute to your health. And in those 80% of the spaces is where the arts thrive, right? Like, we can be at your community center, we can be in your parks, we can be in your library, we can be in your schools, we can be in the grocery stores too, right? And so I think we have to look at arts as that 80% that's outside the 20% of the doctor and the medication you take. The 80% of the rest of your community building, your economic drivers, your health is coming from arts and the rest of the community that's going to thrive. And that's what I'm going to ask you for. And hopefully you'll give us that increase.
Okay. Well, I think based upon what's happening on my screen, there is a tremendous amount of interest, a real desire to do this and improve it and get money for it and things like that. So I'm going to tell my finance chair, and Berkeley Allen will also do it. Here's the last question, because we're pretty much out of time. There is so much feedback coming in on the chat, more than we've ever had on anything else. How are you going to take advantage of this real desire to help you? I mean, it's almost like we just don't want to overload you, because then then it won't work. And we've seen that happen here in Nashville. Yeah. But you've got lots of people watching here and who are out in the community that want to make this really successful. How do we start?
Yeah, so I think I'm doing monthly Zoom meetings every first Thursday of the month at 12 o'clock. Anyone can come and chat with about me about any topic. So I'm doing that, and then every second Wednesdays of the month, I'm hosting coffee in different parts of Nashville. So we're doing the Zoom virtually, so people don't have to take off time from the day. But the in-person meeting, we want to be in local restaurants or anchors, artistic organizations. So those are two opportunities for people to come and give me feedback directly. I'm going to go back and look at the recording of this and take copious notes. There's a strategic planning, cultural planning process that's about to launch in April. There'll be surveys, community listening sessions, focus groups, a steering committee. So there are different levels of ways people can engage with that planning, depending on what their capacity is to be part of that. We have open calls for grant panels. Anyone who wants to be a part of that, we would love for them to be in our panel. So those are all the ways in which they can get access to me. It's not just me, it's my staff too. We're all available to listen and take your notes. I really want to build a solution that's based on the community's feedback and the community's desire to move forward. It's not going to be something me magically solving. It's the community knows what they need, and we have to figure out how to deliver on that. So that's the approach I would take. And as I close, I just want to do one plug. We're doing an NFT workshop the first 2 Saturdays of February. That's another place. We really want community artists to come in and talk about the problems they're facing and figure out if the digital space can do that, but also to collaborate with other artists in that space and connect with each other, turn around and put a Thrive grant in that's closing first week of March, right? So really want people to come to that NFT workshop. It's a free workshop. It'll be held at a library, accessible for free parking, all of that. So, and the second workshop's gonna be all virtual. So I would love for people to come to that workshop and use that as a continuation of the conversation today, and ask the questions, the desires, and then turn around and put in an application. And hopefully you'll put in so many applications that we can't fund you, and then we'll come back to you, Vice Mayor, and say, hey, we need this much more. We're building the case for the funding, right? So, and so that's our goal, is to like provide as many opportunities as possible. But we're gonna create workshops like that before each grant cycle. And our goal is to get artists to talk to each other, collaborate, come up with ideas, and come back and apply. And then say, we don't have enough money in the pot. And we're going to come back to you and ask every year. This is going to be an ongoing cycle. But the other thing that I would love to maybe work with you, Vice Mayor, and the Mayor's office and the council collaboratively, is look at how blue cities like us, who want to move in a different pace than the state wants to, what is the lesson there? Because others are trying to do this too. And maybe there's a way we can look at St. Louis or Tampa or Cleveland or Charlotte, and that are kind of sometimes hamstrung by the state and not able to move as quickly with a special tax or whatever. And I would love to figure out that kind of a model. So we're looking at it in a national perspective and saying what worked in Kansas, what worked in Tampa, and how can we bring that into Nashville? Because I realize that the council is willing and the mayor's office is willing and the vice mayor is willing, but often we're hamstrung by the state. So let's figure out how to work around that issue going forward.
Well, welcome to Nashville. You certainly have, excuse me, there are lots of challenges, but that also means there's lots of opportunities. So 2 things. If people want to send you something, your email address is
daniel.singh@nashville.gov, and I'll just put it in the chat here.
Okay. So people can email you directly.
Anytime, yes.
Donna Stefano is saying artists have lots of thoughts to share. They certainly do.
Absolutely.
We would love to have you come back. And we would love to, and if people want to know about some of the things that are going on, best thing to do is look at the Arts
Alert. We have an Arts Alert website that goes out every month with all of the grants or programs. And then they can also follow us on our social channels, Facebook and Instagram, and we really work hard to keep that up to date as well. So
okay, you and I will talk again,
yes.
particularly about how we can utilize maybe the council
yes.
and the chambers to be helpful. For those of you all who are listening, we weren't sure whether we were going to have a program next week, and then I think I just decided that we should, or I think it's important. You were talking about the relationship between the city and the state. For those of you, obviously, who have been at least watching the news or reading the paper or just listening to social media, there is this issue floating now about decreasing the size of the Metropolitan Council. And that measure, we think, is probably going to move. It's going to come up for discussion fairly quickly. So we're going to have a program next week. We will have a program at 10. We're not sure who our guest will be, but what we'll do is we'll be careful not to get into the conflictual part, but I think it is important to kind of lay out what's happening and what it means and what's been proposed in the bill. So we will have a program next Saturday at 10, which I think will be important for people to listen to. Daniel, thank you. Welcome to Nashville. We're really, really glad you're here. And it's going to take you a while to go through all the stuff in the chat. I could barely keep up with it, but I think you got a lot of fans out there, and you got a lot of people who really want you to be successful. So, and I want you to be successful too. So
it's an exciting city to be in.
Well, we're glad. Again, we're glad you're here. Everybody have a great weekend. There's a lot of football art on this weekend. but there's also a lot of stuff going on around the city. Everybody have a great weekend. We'll see you next week. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you.